that yet because I think because I think that if you speak from there, they don't work. So.
Oh, okay. So use this.
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Thank you.
Test. Yeah, works. Okay. Hi everyone. My name is Brant Houston. I've been working in data journalism since 1986, which sounds pretty weird. But what I was going to do today was just sort of go over the history and development of what's been known as computer-assisted reporting. Now it's called data journalism, and there's something on the way that's been given the name of computational journalism. And I think what I'll do is just sit here for a sec, but maybe I can get this. Okay, so is that the right panel? You're at the right session? Okay. The other thing is a relatively small group. I don't mind being interrupted or questions as we go along. So it's not like a lecture. If you want me to stop, you have a question, you want to talk about something, go ahead, just raise your hand and let me know, okay? Quick survey of everyone here, okay? So how many people work with data every day? Okay, all right. And how many people work with something like spreadsheets, like whether it's Google Sheets? How many people work with a database manager? Okay. Who does mapping? Any sort of mapping? Okay. Coding? People clean with code? Okay, so very, very serious crowd. Great, among friends. A little my background is that I started out as a sort of reporter for daily newspapers. I quickly got into being an investigative reporter and learning how to do that. And I found that I was one of those people that really liked documents. I did not take any computer science, nothing like that when I started out. And, but somewhere in 1985, 1986, I heard about databases. And I started paying attention to about 10 people maybe that were really doing work day in, day out, using data for stories. Because I was very documents oriented, I suddenly realized instead of spending 3 weeks looking at 3 boxes of documents, I had the possibility of looking at 20 or 30,000 documents in an hour. Of course, the computers I worked with at the time, you could actually hear them clicking as they went through records. I'm not kidding you. My first computer was a 286. So I just gravitated towards it. I realized I suddenly had context for my stories. I was getting tips that no one called me on those tips. And so pretty quickly I just started to integrate it into the reporting I did every day. The problem I had by doing that was that for me, it was all one. It all worked together. For the newsroom and people who were afraid of math and data, I suddenly became the nerd in the corner. And my experience in writing stories and features and investigations in 10 years, suddenly everyone forgot that. And they wanted to assign a writer to me because I could do this other thing. So as I went along, though, I started working with individual reporters, and I started to learn how you might teach this, which was really important, get past people's fear of data. And so I decided I would take 2 years off in 1994 and go to investigative reporters and editors, which had taken the lead in the United States in developing data reporting. And that 2-year plan turned into 14 years. Doing a lot of training and working with people and still working on stories. And then I went to Illinois in 2007 and the University of Illinois. One of the reasons I went there is because they have something called the National Center for Supercomputing Applications. Has anyone heard of that? Anybody? Well, that's where the first commercial web browser was developed. And it was at what's called the NCSA. They even have a little plaque in front of the building now. But it wasn't just that. It was that they have all these people that have been working with unstructured data, doing all sorts of really amazing things with data. And so I've been able to go and walk across the campus and visit and hang out with those folks quite a bit. So it's just it's a great thing to have there. And that's why somewhere in the year 2007-8, I started getting very interested in machine learning, text mining, and things like that. I'm certainly not at the quality of any of the folks that I deal with in computer sciences or information science, but I know how to work with them, and I know what can be done now. So anyway, that's my background, and I hope to keep doing this for a while longer. This continues to be totally fascinating. So in any case, I'll stop talking about where I've been, and I'll just go over this sort of evolution of things. And this leaves a lot out, so I'm just going to touch on some moments here. So one of the things is I always try to get people to think about as the quality and the data and the software changes over the years, is there's some basic things we keep doing again and again. And there's one phenomenon I've noticed over the years, and I call it cyber utopia. And cyber utopia is when a new tool comes along and everybody gets very excited about it and forgets some of the fundamental things about the world of data. And I'll go over a little bit of that. But whatever comes along, what we continue to do as journalists is we continue to try to go beyond the anecdotal. We are always trying to find patterns and trends within the data. We always are trying to find outliers. Sometimes the outliers are the best thing of all to find. And we still want to present our stories in a more compelling, engaging, and credible way. And that's why I got into data. But I continue to note this because every time some new software or analytical tool comes along, everyone says, oh, that changes everything. And I really don't think it changes that much. So what is computer-assisted reporting? Because the name started changing at the beginning of the 21st century. People started giving whatever this is different names. Computer-assisted reporting stuck around for a while. But let's see, what names do we have now? Data journalism, data-driven journalism, analytical journalism. I can't name them all. And whoever thought up the name then wants to fight about it and make it their brand and the brand for everybody else. I personally really don't care, but I have found as the names come along, sometimes they mean little different things to people. But what is computer-assisted reporting, which started around a little after something called precision journalism? It's got some basic things. It's finding and downloading databases without or with a little bit of scraping. It's analysis with spreadsheets and databases. That's what it was when it was starting out. Those are pretty much the tools we had. We had a couple of statistical packages, but these were the two tools. And that's where most of the work got done. And a lot of work is still getting done with those two tools. There was sort of what I call starter visualizations. We got to have charts. We started to play around with maps. Social network analysis came along. And as things went along, people even do word clouds. But again, it's not trying to do really complex things. It's keeping things really simple. And then we finally got some software to convert PDFs and so forth. And other files that we can convert so they can be used by spreadsheets or database managers or whatever else. Actually, the converting of PDFs was such a huge thing. For about 10 years, our only solution was to retype things into a spreadsheet. There was no way around it. Has anyone seen the film Spotlight, by the way? Has anyone seen that? There's a glorious moment in which there are directories of priests and various parishes they've been in, and they put it into a spreadsheet. This was a grand moment. I'm friends with Matt Carroll, who's portrayed in that and doing that spreadsheet, and he and I laugh about it. It's like this big leap forward, right? So anyway, that's sort of basically what it was for quite a while, for 15 years or so. Things started getting more interesting as we went along. So what I want to do, though, is just sort of take a look at what happened. So in the 20th century, the spreadsheets and database managers, statistical software, visualization of data, often through charts. The mapping was complicated but could get done. And then we have various tools and software for cleaning data. And the first thing we used for cleaning data actually was something called Xywrite. It was basically a word processor. That's the only way we could launder, as I like to say, launder the data so it was useful in some kind of an analytical software. So the real start was in 1967. Is anybody familiar with the name Phil Meyer? I really respect history and mentors and pioneers. He took a fellowship at Harvard. He was a working journalist. And he ended up helping analyze race riots in the United States. And does people know that story? Basically, there were race riots in the city of Detroit. And the city leaders and others were saying the people who did the rioting were outsiders. They were people who came into the city. And Phil actually put together a survey so he could interview people. And it turned out the people who were rioting were the people from the city. And through social science methods, he just, took the counterintuitive way. And it really really blew people's minds that you could do work that normally it takes social scientists years to do. He did it in a few months. And he went on to do court records with various court record analysis and so forth with others. And he started to inspire some other people to do it. So 3 or 4 other people started doing this kind of stuff in the 70s and the 80s, but it did not come on fast. There's a guy who's really overlooked in a lot of history of this. It's Columbia University professor Steve Ross, and he's not there now. But he was actually teaching data and database managers to journalists back in the early 80s. And he's forgotten. And one person who learned from him was a guy named Elliot Jaspin. And Elliot Jaspin was different than Phil Meyer because Elliot said you can get a lot of really good work and analysis done without statistical packages, without being more complex in social science. They'll love the power of these stories with data can come from grouping similar categories together and counting or summing them. You didn't really have to do a lot more than that because no one else was doing it. The government wasn't doing it. Other people weren't looking at things like that. And the other part was that Elliot Jaspin loved to match different data sets together. And he did a groundbreaking story of school bus drivers in Providence, Rhode Island, taking a look at them because they've been hitting kids and there have been other problems. And he ran a criminal database against the bus driver database and found drunks, child molesters, convicted felons, and so forth. And that actually got written up and was something I noticed, and one of the reasons I went and saw him and said, what are you doing there? I also noted something else. As a reporter working with data, he had his own office. So this was a big deal. It's like, if I do this, I can have my own office. So we had a huge technical problem during the 1980s. Data was kept on 9-track tapes. Has anyone ever seen those? You can see them in old science fiction movies. They're rolling around on these big mainframes. That was where the data was. The floppy disks were just coming along. And if you wanted to work on this stuff, you had to find time on a mainframe at a newspaper or at a university. And usually it was late at night because you'd be the last in line, and it was complicated, and you had to learn all sorts of different software to run a mainframe, and it was very complex. But just having to find a mainframe was a problem. What Elliot did with a programmer named Dan Woods is they did a little software program that allowed you to take a portable tape drive. If you've ever seen music that's been on tapes, it looked just like that. And the software allowed you to plug that portable tape drive, which was about this big, into a personal computer. Now that sounds really dull and dumb, but it changed everything because suddenly we did not have to deal with anyone else. We could deal with the data all ourselves. Another guy named James Brown started doing stuff in Indiana, and the first, it was called the CAR conference, was held in 1990. So things really were moving slow, and until the 9-track express, part of the reason was because we had the mainframe barrier. So then a couple other things happened. And what really happened was the web browser launched. And with that, all of a sudden, a lot of journalists started understanding what data was. I was on the internet for years before there was actually a pretty face, which is an interesting way to get information. And the pretty face was the web. And that started people understanding the possibilities of it. I have to say that in 93 I got the job, 94 I started doing a lot of training across the United States. And for the next 6 years, I had to listen to managing editors say that the web was a passing fad. Okay, so in terms of the evolution of things. Also, journalists were not being allowed on the web because bosses thought that they would spend a lot of time surfing, or they would allow hackers to get into the newspaper. And because of that, a lot of journalists had to work from home if they wanted to get on the web. It was a ridiculous situation for about 6 years. I finally had to do a textbook because everybody who said they were going to do the textbook never got around to doing it. Those are hard work, so the first textbook was in 1996 that was hands-on. All of a sudden, a number of Scandinavian journalists started coming to workshops we had where I was at the University of Missouri, and suddenly it started moving across the Atlantic. So has anyone ever heard of a net media or a conference like that? It's hung around for a while, but really for only about 5 years, it was at a peak, and it was in London. And summer after summer, a group of us from Denmark and the US would train journalists in the UK and from other places. And we had these little car conferences, or was part of it, these data conferences, and made some progress there. But we were continually told when we went to the UK that there was no data in the UK. Which was an interesting thing. So we started getting on the web and getting data from the UK and taking data to the UK so that journalists there could see there was data in the UK. So the next thing that really happened that moved things along quite a bit was in 2001, we started something called the Global Investigative Journalism Conference. We had no idea if anyone would come. It resembled what was known as Investigative Reporters and Editors Conference in the US, where you had traditional reporting methods, sessions on that, but then you had special track that had only to do with data analysis and learning various tools. And it was in Copenhagen, and when we did it, we had absolutely no idea if anyone would come. We just, kind of threw the dice. Turned out 300 journalists from 40 countries came in, and it was off and running. Everybody was excited about data, and we suddenly were building a network of people around the world that were interested in using data in their stories. So then we sort of skipped to the 21st century, and to me this has been an incredibly exciting last 18 years because things have just gotten better, more interesting. We've met a lot of challenges, particularly when it comes to analyzing social media, when it comes to text mining, starting to think about what to do with audio, with video. It was like every time you turned around, somebody was overcoming yet one more challenge in understanding data and bringing it together. And The Guardian really became recognized for its data journalism. It was very exciting to see it. And there was a moment where there were the riots in the UK a few years ago, and The Guardian not only did this incredibly upscaled Phil Meyer kind of analysis, they actually interviewed Phil Meyer to talk about how the methodology and the ways of looking at particular data and where writers came from, that way of analysis and looking at it really hadn't changed. It had just been, same thing had been applied with incredible new tools, incredible visualization. Is somebody here from The Guardian or anybody has seen, did anyone see that work? If you go and see it, it was just really impressive. And it also took the lead in telling people how we were actually doing this so they could decide whether or not they actually believed in it. So what else has happened? Many things have happened, but one of the major things that's come through is the analysis of major database leaks and how to deal with them. And I'm going to refer to an article that's come out recently that I think is really good in terms of what's being used. European data centers have gotten established. There's starting to be centers in other continents. The Global Investigative Journalism Network has brought in its training and resources. How many people know about gijn.org? Anybody in particular? I think the staff is really doing a good job in just really moving ahead on providing resources, especially for people who are trying to get into this and learn it. And by the way, there's going to be a conference in Hamburg in September, and it should be pretty exciting. Another thing that happened is hacks and hackers came along. Has anybody joined that or familiar with it? Who's familiar with it? And Aaron Pilhofer is here as one of the creators of that particular network and project. And what that represented was one of the more exciting things that happened in this evolution was that people were coming into journalism from computer science. And so suddenly the skill level went way up. But we had a couple of cultural differences, and there was some real bumping of heads. One of the differences was that if you're developing software and you're coding, there's no question that there are going to be flaws, and you'll develop it and perfect it as you go along, right? And that's why we get beta and 1.0, which I think is beta, or 1.2 versions of things, and so forth. But the shocking thing for some of the people that came in from computer science is if you do a story, particularly an investigative story, you actually have to get it right the first time. And so that was a cultural difference. From the journalist side, it continued to be some resistance to the next new thing. One of the things that I think everyone's had to get used to is you have to keep learning. And periodically, journalists that have learned a certain level of analysis and software just are tired of learning it. They just want to do stories. So there was this bumping of heads. Hacks and hackers reflected that, and it's really smoothed things out, I think, tremendously. And we have a much more productive environment going on now. So that set the stage for computational journalism. So who's real familiar with this term? Anybody? Well, it's okay, because actually if you read about it, some of the writing is we're still figuring out how to define it. Now there's some people who decide they want a definition and they've gone ahead and they've put that definition in. But it is kind of that interesting moment, which is, oh yeah, computational journalism, there are now a couple conferences on it, so what is it? Well, we tend to not always agree, but the definition is forming, and it's always fun to see sort of a new field expand. So what journalists do, I think, for the most part, is get methods from other professions and apply them in journalism, and sometimes misapply them and make them, it makes it work for journalism. So one of the things that happened in investigative journalism in the 1960s and 70s is there were a number of people that worked in law and in prosecution. And so a lot of prosecutor types of record keeping and precision entered into journalism. And then of course we got data journalism, and what we really got, that we really took was social science methods, and those started to get applied more and more. Where we've expanded with the computational journalism is it's it's even more computer science and more information sciences, library information sciences. So the people that we're talking to a lot more now are people in information science schools, computer science, informatics, and so that's where a lot of the computational journalism methodology has come along. So let's see, what are our buzzwords now? Way back when it was spreadsheets, database managers, data crunching, all these kinds of terms. Now we're all excited about algorithms, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, right? Those are the buzzwords. You're hearing these all the time. So what's going to be interesting is how we work out applying these things in a really with really good methodology. So one of the things that has been said in a number of papers and articles, computational journalism helps reporters to explore big data sets of structured and unstructured data and visualize the results. That's one kind of definition of this, which in some cases it sounds like what we've been doing. But there's certain things that come along with computational journalism. There's faster analysis through coding, particularly of unstructured data. There's more powerful visualizations that are often interactive and animated. There's better automation of routine activities or deeper analysis. So that's where we're getting into machine learning. Use of artificial intelligence techniques, and again, machine learning. So basically, trying to get the software, the algorithms, to learn how to look better and more closely at the data as they go along, so that they're building up this knowledge themselves, and that they're searching for things we want them to be searching for in the data that we never have time to do ourselves. So that's kind of where this is trending. And this is the other trend that's coming along. I worked with Pork Cassidy years ago and have stayed in touch, and I'm really glad he's in this position at Reuters, because Reuters in particular has thought about artificial intelligence with using artificial intelligence to write stories, to do routine stories, and to maybe do some routine analysis. And Pork did an analysis of those kinds of stories, and so he's really working on the project that makes sure that human beings are involved, overseeing and supervising these various algorithms. Because one thing that hasn't really changed in terms of software is software computers will do exactly what you tell them to do. And they will run a train off a cliff or take a plane into the ground. You know, they're not going to take care of themselves. So this is a real interesting links insights that I would keep an eye on, because I think this is going to be a wise way to deal with these, with machine learning, with artificial intelligence applications. This is another quote by somebody who continues to do a lead in research. He was at Associated Press, now the Wall Street Journal. I think he's still there. And he says, in computational journalism and AI will help journalists do more investigative work by analyzing massive sets of data and pointing relationships not easily visible even to the most experienced reporter. So in its own way, it's doing exactly what we've done with spreadsheets. It's just dealing with the big data for us, and it's dealing in a more sophisticated way. It's doing some other things too. How many people convert PDFs routinely? Anybody? Okay. The rest of you avoid them? It's funny how we get chuckles out PDFs. It's really, but we know what this misery is. So I don't know if you have this bureaucratic problem or a problem with bureaucrats, which is they will give you a PDF once they learn that we could start converting them. Now the thing to do with the PDF is to scan it, right? And so that's a big development that everyone's trying to work with the software to get around the scanning, recognizing optical characters. And part of computational journalism is this is really pretty technical nuts and bolts, but if you can't convert data and make it flexible and it remains petrified, then you are going back to 1985 where we either couldn't get data or we had to build data. We had to build our own database sets. So this is actually a big problem, just as PDFs, regular PDFs were for a while. Another thing that's being applied to is transcriptions of videos, collection of public video records, audio records, and so forth. Doing stuff that should make our life a lot easier, especially if you're in the US, and I think happening in Europe, where we're still losing journalists all the time because of the crash of advertising. If this comes along, the ability to cover a city government or a regional government will go way up if these transcriptions are effectively done, and then you have some basic searching going on by the algorithms to alert you to decisions made and so forth and produce those. So this is actually a technical thing, but really, really important. To me, the most exciting thing is entity extraction. Does anyone work with software or somebody who works with software do entity extraction? Who's familiar with the term? Okay. So anybody want to tell me what think it is other than my definition?
It's extracting different information from one document and relating it to looking at network visualization to nodes, for instance.
Yeah, and that's right. And an easier way for me to understand it is, and by the way, you all can do it if you get a subscription, free subscription to Document Cloud. Does anybody know about documentcloud.org? Okay. I may or may not be able to show it, but look it up. If you're a bona fide journalist, you can get a subscription to it. Basically, it uses a Reuters tool called OpenCalais. And OpenCalais, for those not familiar with it, it'll take a document that's in some kind of text form. It could be a PDF, it can even convert it, but basically it takes the text and it goes through and does something that we like to do but would take us forever, which is looks at the frequency of certain names occurring, certain places occurring. I'm saying this the most primitive way, it can do even more, but it basically is doing the kind of stuff we like to do. Like how often does this person show up in this document? How often does this place, does this corporation show up? And it's basically looking at this frequency count. And that's a wonderful thing to do if you've ever worked with documents, because it took me hours to do that. Now, it may not be perfect, but it's a great start. And so it put it in Document Cloud, it goes through OpenCalais, the documents, and then they end up in Document Cloud in a way that, first of all, tells you those frequencies and points back to where those places or people are in the document. So you can go back and check and dig in and see what the context is around them. It also, Document Cloud also allows you, and this is another Aaron Pillhofer project, so if you see him at this conference, he's here, thank him, because he's really helped us all. So you can go in there with a document and you can annotate it. So basically, you know how you can comment in WordPress or whatever, in Word, you actually can comment on things. And I now think it's possible we can have investigations by annotation, which I have seen stories written on a particular topic. It points back to the Document Cloud the documents, which can be public, and it's annotated, and the story of reading through a document and finding the lies, for example, is actually pretty fascinating. And I'll spend like a couple minutes with the story, and then I'll spend a lot of time with the documents. It's very interactive, and it's quite something to do. So OpenCalais and Document Cloud has made some of the basic tools I've been talking about available to everybody in a way that you don't have to do the coding. You can concentrate on what you want to analyze and what you're looking for in documents. It's just amazing. So in the midst of all this, all the things have changed over time. There's some fundamental things that remain, and I always bring them up whenever we get the brand new tools that are going to make life easy for us and will solve everything and uncover everything within documents or within databases. The credibility is at the core of journalism. If you just get a new tool and you let it run wild, you're going to undercut the very basis of what we are. It continues to be true that nearly all databases, sometimes I say all, or data, have flaws or incomplete. And I think everybody, the people, we all agree, right? Everybody who works with data, the first thing you're doing is, how bad is this database? Is it usable? Can I work with it? And that's where a number of us have started to really think about databases like people. You interview somebody, they'll tell you a bunch of stuff about which they know something, and then they'll throw in and start talking about stuff about which they know nothing, right? Which is sort of Trump syndrome. But, you know, so you have to know, what does this data really know, this database really know, and what does it lack? The other thing is, we're in the same situation we've always been in. If we have a database that looks totally incomplete, totally flawed, and somebody's making policy from that database, we have a story. And so I continue to encourage people, don't walk away from a database that's useless if somebody's making policy from it, if you think it's useless. It is an important thing to do. The integrity checks of data are necessary, and that leads to greater credibility. There's nothing you can say more about, you know, the power of going back and figuring out where the flaws are and pointing them out to people. Checking the integrity of the data is so important. And you know, we have two kinds of integrity checks, and I'm not sure everybody always does those. One is an internal integrity check. You basically run a group by, say, over a city name, and you see it's spelled 6 different ways. Okay, you don't have to refer to anything else. That's an internal integrity check. It tells you the flaws in the data. But the outer integrity check is one of the important things to do. Who else has used this database, and what have their results been? I learned that lesson way back when I got a database, and the total value of the money, it was $6.5 billion. That's what I got, adding up thousands of records. I looked at another report and it said $6.2 billion. You know, what's $300 million among friends? But I wanted to make sure I understood why there was this difference from a different outside report and what I was getting. And it turned out that some of the numbers I was looking at should be negative numbers if they had in the column before it the letter B. If it had the letter A, then the number was positive. It was contracts. The letter B stood for contracts that had been taken back, deobligated. So outer integrity checks just still have to be done. Again, we recognize our digital tools have limitations and reduce errors. This is another thing that I think, especially if you work with data, you get pretty tunnel vision on one particular database. I like to think about, if I'm doing a story and I'm interviewing people, I want a minimum of 3 sources, 3 people, just a minimum for a story. The same way, I'm trying to always find 3 databases for the story or the topic I'm working on. I'm happy to have one main database, but I want to see if there are any others out there. Data journalism, whatever you're going to call it, computational data journalism, data-driven journalism, computer-assisted, it still includes the 3 pillars of journalism of reporting. Documents and data is 1, interviews, people is 2, and observation and field work, that is getting out and looking around, getting out into the field, is part of it. One of the better examples I have of this is there's a National Bridge Inventory database, infrastructure database in the United States on bridges, and it's put together once a year. And people get that data, and you can look at the bridges that could be in trouble, they're insufficient, have problems, and so forth. But it's put together once a year, so you have to interview some people to find out if you found bad bridges, how bad are they, and so forth. But the other part is you actually either have to use some sort of satellite photography or get out and look at the bridges and see if they're still there. People who have just gone with the data, if they hadn't gotten out, they wouldn't have figured out that one of the bad bridges has been taken down or has been moved. In some cases, bridges get moved, and a lot of people don't recognize that. So you've got to do all three things. I'm always saying, and a lot of friends of mine have done this a long time, that the data is a good start. It's not necessarily the conclusion at all. And then the adoption of the new tools and adoption of maybe some different kinds of methods does not mean elimination of the old tools. I've always noticed somebody learns a new piece of more complicated software, and a spreadsheet would do it faster and more easily, but they've got a new tool, and so they would prefer to do that. I'm always about getting to the story as quickly as possible. I'm also very much into Gordian knot solutions. And I think everybody who deals with this. Who's familiar with the Gordian knot myth? Anybody? I actually know people that have created a company called Gordian Knot. The myth is, in the time of Alexander the Great, there was in Egypt, I think it was Egypt, there was this rope knot, huge rope knot. It's called the Gordian knot, and no one could untie it. And so Alexander the Great comes along, they say, well, you're Alexander the Great, surely you can untie this knot. And he basically said, no problem. He took out his sword and cut it. And so it wasn't trying to disentangle things. And once you hear that and you get into any kind of coding, you're always going, is there a Gordian knot solution? So I always say, is there a simpler tool, they'll do it more quickly. So some further reading. Did anyone see the BuzzFeed project? It's really, you guys saw it, yeah? And they also said how they did it. And it's basically looking at patterns of flights, basically teaching the computer program to say, this is what a spy plane flight would look like, or a law enforcement flight. And so they looked at flights over the US and started identifying law enforcement planes, and basically spy planes, which you can never do manually, not at all. But that's a really nice article if you're looking for where things are really heading. This one is, not only do you see the story, Peter Algis, who's brilliant, just goes through step by step what they did to find this. So this is, I don't know if anyone's seen this. This came out recently on the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. Marina Walker, who is the deputy editor, director of the consortium, has taken a year off, and boy, she's using it well, to have a fellowship at Stanford University in the US. And she's been doing a whole set of different things, but she's really been working with people in their computer lab in computational journalism. And so she's reflecting on these huge, you're familiar with the ICIJ and the leaks they've done, offshore leaks. They just did a tremendous project on medical devices using databases that weren't leaked. But now she's had time to reflect on the tools that she's learned that are out there that could have been used for the projects they've done so far and made their job a lot easier. And so this is really a nice, strong story, very practical, and saying, you know, you need to be aware of what else is out there. And that's why I got involved with the NCSA at the University of Illinois, because I saw all these things they were doing. You know, they're trying to really work, say, on sentiment analysis. Has anybody seen some of those? Still in an iffy situation right now, but it's been interesting where you actually analyze the emotions in the text. In any case, she's gotten time to really spend some hours with some of the computer scientists working on these projects. So that's a nice article to take a look at. And then, this is not comprehensive, it's just, here's a quick place, 2 places to go, just to get a good overview of what's going on. And the other part is, to remember, I'm remembering this all the time, is this is a developing field. And that, to me, always is super exciting to see. The Columbia University, that link to Columbia University is actually a course. So I was fascinated as people start to teach this more, and is what they're putting together for their syllabus and what tools they plan to use and what they plan to show. So that's a nice one there. This is the Computational Journalism Lab at Stanford, and so that's like watching what they're doing in real time. They're publishing and talking about, what software they're using, what techniques, and so forth. But to me, one is to sort of say, this is where we are, that's Columbia, where we've gotten so far. And then the other one is, and this is where we are and where we're going. So I'm always on the lookout for those. And I think that's about it. So other than possibly looking at a couple of these sites, I just wanted to open up for discussion. And any questions or observations? Things I left out, because there are obviously some savvy people here. Any projects that you've seen? Anybody? This is the wall of silence. This is like teaching. Yes.
My name is Tulette Dreyfus. I'm from the University of Melbourne's School of Computing and Information Systems.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested to know who you think are the world leaders in this computational journalism now in terms of universities or research centers.
And doing it right now, I think Stanford is one of the definite leaders. This is moving so fast, I could probably be leaving out 10 institutions at this point. I'm just trying to keep up. The good news is the conferences have started. So I'm starting to look through like what panels are. I'm going to try to go to them over the next 12 or 14 months. And here's another thing is, it's a little harder to identify. For example, the Stanford one is more in the computer science side, whereas others might be like really connected into the journalism school more. But these are more identifiable. It's the Tao Center at Columbia University is doing that. But I know some stuff. I mean, if things go right, we'll be doing some really interesting stuff in Illinois in the next couple of years. But we're not up to Stanford standards by any means at all. So does anybody know of any other places you're watching? Yeah. Yeah. Right. Because Ira Chenoy is there, and he was digging in on that early on. That's a good one to mention. Yes. One sec here. What? Yeah.
There's a guy called Paul Bradshaw in Birmingham, UK.
Right.
Teaching.
He
spoke
Paul.
there earlier.
Yeah. Paul's been a leader on
He's
this
my
too.
tutor. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Paul's a good one. And who else?
Paul Bradshaw.
Yeah. Paul's always coming up with new things. Yes. Anybody else? I heard somebody else suggest somebody. Nick Diapolis is here, writes about it a lot. He's on the program here. He would be very aware of that too, of who else is coming up fast. So again, it's going to be hard to keep up initially, but there are some things that are pretty basic that people are doing. If you hear somebody's deep into text mining, that's a code phrase for they're probably doing lots of other things that are interesting. Yes. Yeah.
I was interested in what you said about information scientists, because I've come from a librarian, information scientist background, and now I'm transforming into data journalism. Do you think there's more scope for developing the links between those two professions?
Did everyone hear that? Okay, so over the course of my career, I and other people have said, who do you need to make friends with? Okay, so back before I got into data, well, you want to have good law enforcement, I was investigative reporter, good law enforcement, sources, et cetera. We talk about that, prosecutors. So then we moved on and we wanted to get people who were data crunchers. And now, to me, it was sort of a big wake-up moment when I went to Illinois because I became an affiliated faculty member at the School of Information Science. And it was like, oh, Jesus, they've been doing this stuff for years. This is just ridiculous that we didn't really know this. And that is working with big data, working with Google on big data projects. I mean, there's amazing stuff going on that. And they have their different names too, like informatics or School of Information. We're getting different names, umbrellas over basically was text mining, organizing unstructured data, making it easier to see the patterns again, the trends, the different things in it. So yeah, I make friends with somebody who deals with big data in an information science school. That would be I have friends now, but that would, if I didn't, that's my first stop. And because the other thing is, over the years, the language between computer scientists and journalists who use data has become pretty similar, but the language and mission of information scientists and journalists, I think, are really close, that we have really common interest. We may not have the goal to, to do amazing story, journalism story, but in terms of dealing with the data and understanding what's in it, I think we have a lot in common. So, yes.
Hi.
Yeah.
I work for the European Journalism Center. We just launched the big platform on data journalism, datajournalism.com. But my question is actually on, we're still struggling. I think what you talked about is great, but we're still struggling a lot with making people understand the basic value of working with data in journalism. Mm-hmm. So apart from looking into data science and information science, what can we do to make sure that this kind of discipline is not too far from the daily reality of newsrooms? How can we make things work on a day-to-day basis so that journalists understand the value of using this kind of methodologies, not only for the shiny stories and the big investigations, but for a lot of other tasks that would help them save time, for example, in their work, or simply get faster to the results that they want to get to.
So let's see, I've been trying to figure this out for 30 years now, and I'm aware of it. I actually have an article on the new page, which is dealing with math phobia, and we're still dealing with that. And we're still in a situation, there's all this exciting stuff, but a lot of the stories, the daily, the weekly stories, are really done with Excel or Google Sheets, which have been really improved and gotten simpler. I think the key to having a journalist understand the value of this is to have one success story, however minor, and not keeping things complicated. If somebody can look at a batch of data and chart the change over time quickly, which Google Sheets makes incredibly, almost scarily easy now to do sort of a fever chart based on 2 columns. If somebody can see that and see that what took them 3 to 4 hours and had a lot of grunt work and now took care of all that and also kind of revealed a story, however simple, I think that's the only way I've found it, is that we're very practical people if we come from the journalism side, and we need to see results much more quickly than other people. I'm always joking, I live in 2 worlds. I live in journalism, I live in academics, and what takes 30 minutes here can take 2 weeks of faculty meetings or 3 years that takes a week in journalism, because the goals are different. But I think the spreadsheet is the basic, one of my former students calls it the gateway drug for data. The spreadsheet can get you results on things that you had not had before. How are we doing on time? 5 minutes, okay. So I'm glad you brought it back home to what is, to me, unless you come in from the computer science arena, the hierarchy of learning is dealing with understanding how to search effectively, actually becoming familiar with the phrase Boolean logic and or not, learning how to download quickly, and then the next one is working with spreadsheets, and then getting to database managers because more than anything, they handle large data sets better than Excel or Google Sheets, but most important, they match files together that either are intended to be matched together or more excitingly aren't intended, and so we're doing something enterprising. But there's that kind of way to go up. I'm just really happy that the visualization tools have gotten easier. The mapping's gotten easier because we're in a situation now that it's almost you want to start with the visualization of the data before you even get into columns and rows. But that's what I find. There's a New York Times reporter that had one of those columns on, you know, how I do my work now and the text mining tools and Excel and so forth. And I remember the breakthrough moment because I showed him how to use Excel when he was looking at some salaries, and he was using pencil and paper way back when. And he, you know, didn't think much of data journalism or anything like that. After that, I just had to get out of his way. You know, it was just that moment of, oh my God. They also, this was way back when, I know we're going to finish up, but it's a good story to know, which is we've come from that moment where a reporter would be given a printout and told that there was no database. And just imagine that for a moment, you know, where I'd have to say, if they were able to print it out in columns and rows, it's on the computer in columns and rows. So we've come a long way. But anyway, it's a long answer, but I think spreadsheets can, especially Google Sheets now and visualization, I think it opens eyes. So, and once somebody sees it's efficient and they get stories that they weren't getting before, you're in. But we do seem to have a very big community that does not like numbers initially. So if you're ever teaching, I know there are a lot of savvy people here. I found if you want to teach somebody median, call it a lie detector, and that tends to like bridge over to the other side. Because, you know, everyone lies with averages, with means, so and median takes the lies out. Any last question? Okay, well, thanks for sticking around. I appreciate it. Thank you.